Mira stepped onto the gravel with a silence that carried more weight than a shout, her boots crunching in slow, deliberate rhythm as she moved toward the starting line. Every eye followed her, but not out of respect, out of a collective expectation. That she would fail again, like last time, when she had dropped her rifle before even loading it and walked away in tears before the second round even began. She had been 17 then, and they thought she had only come because her father had passed. And she wanted to prove something impossible, using a gun that had seen better decades, one that had a split in the stock and rust hugging the edges like ivy around a tombstone. But this year she walked with a different air, her posture straighter, her shoulders still but not tense. Her eyes fixed not on the judges or the crowd or the drone that sat docked on its tiny launch pad, humming softly like a sleeping insect. No, she was staring at the sky above it, the open space where the wind moved, like a beast unseen, and her breath timed itself to its movement like she had been practicing in secret somewhere far away where no one could laugh. They remembered her now, but not kindly. Some still chuckled and nudged each other with amused smirks, betting bottles of bourbon on how quickly she would miss and be escorted off. But none of them knew where she had been all year. None knew about the isolated cabin 2 miles past the burnt pine ridge, or the man with no name who lived there and taught her how to shoot by forcing her to listen before letting her even touch a bullet. He had made her lie still in the snow until she could tell which direction a crow would fly before it moved. He had taken her into the woods at night, blindfolded, and told her to shoot by feel alone, guided only by the sound of breath and heartbeat and wind and sometimes silence itself when it thickened and warned of something more than just distance. Now she stood still as the judge announced the round, and even his voice faltered slightly when he read her name, Mira Fallon, with the same cracked rifle from last year. One eye on the drone and one on the girl who did not look away from the sky. The drone began to rise in slow mechanical flutters, its tiny rotors slicing the air as it lifted 6 feet, 10 feet, then 20. Its lights blinking in random intervals, its wings shifting into place. It was built to be unpredictable, to mimic the darting path of a hawk chased by fire. Its movements programmed. By the same coder who designed military evasion drills, this was no trick shot. This was chaos, made airborne. Mira lifted the rifle slowly, her fingers moving without hesitation. The crowd quieted, not out of respect, but out of curiosity, like watching. A fuse burned toward a wet match. Everyone expected the same result, a misfire, a flinch, a cracked shot flying wide into the field. But instead, her feet adjusted subtly, the rifle pressed against her shoulder, and her eye narrowed as if drawing an invisible thread between her and the thing above, now zipping sideways in a jolt so fast, most barely caught it. The first shot rang out and a gasp followed, because it had come too close, far closer than any expected. But it missed, the sound of the bullet ricocheting. Off a post behind the drone made the officials glance at each other, and the range owner smirked, ready to call her off when she did something strange. She did not fire again. She waited, eyes locked, fingers loose, and then she closed one eye, breathed in, and the rifle did not move. It vibrated gently against her frame like it remembered something, and when the second shot finally came, it was after a pause too long for normal play, almost like she had hesitated, but anyone who watched her closely could tell it was not hesitation, it was calculation. The bullet ripped through the air in a strange arc, not a direct path, but one shaped by wind and perhaps something else, and it passed so close to the drone that it clipped one of its rear fins, sending it into a brief spiral, not a crash, just a stutter. And then it recovered its flight path, changing now slightly more erratic, like it had been touched by something not mechanical, and Mira lowered her rifle slowly as the crowd began to murmur. Not loudly, but enough for tension to spark among the other competitors who now watched her with narrowed eyes and unsure thoughts. She turned to look at them, then not smug, not victorious, just calm, like she knew that was only the beginning, and in truth. It was because the air shifted. Then cold air rushing down from the north too quickly for weather, and with it came the faint echo of a sound, not mechanical, not natural, either a low hum that made birds scatter from trees beyond the range. Line and one of the judges adjusted his earpiece, only to find static washing through it like ocean foam. Mira tilted her head slightly, and then said something no one near her could hear, but those who did later claimed it was not in English at all. And it did not sound like a word, but more like a signal. And when she turned her gaze back toward the sky, the drone hovered again now, slower, blinking red and green, but its shape seemed to change in subtle ways that had nothing to do with mechanics, and then a shadow moved behind it, not cast by the sun, but something passing briefly between them and the light. A shape without outline. Something that seemed to blink into and out of view so quickly that most who saw it dismissed it as a trick of the eye. But Mira's stance changed instantly, her body angling just enough to adjust for wind that had not yet arrived, her eyes following something none of them could see, and her hand lifted the rifle once more, this time not to shoot at the drone, but at the empty air just beyond it where that shadow had passed, and she did not fire yet because she was waiting again. And whatever it was she waited for was coming fast. The drone moved like it had a mind of its own, jerking, left then diving, hard to the right with an unnatural twitch that even the range marshal frowned at, wondering if the AI was glitching or if someone had altered the code. Mira stood still, her rifle raised but not tracking the drone directly. Instead, she was following a rhythm no one else seemed to hear. Not even the hum of the machine or the whisper of wind around them could distract her from whatever invisible current she was tuned into. Her breath came slow, her body grounded and yet fluid like a branch waiting to bend in a storm rather than snap. The second shot was never supposed to take so long. No one at Broken Rifle had ever hesitated between rounds unless they were injured or afraid, and yet here was Mira holding the rifle like it was not a weapon, but a vessel, her finger resting gently on the trigger without pressure. Her left eye closed and the right eye narrowed as she watched the sky, not just the drone but something beyond it, something only she could trace moving through the air with impossible silence. The crowd behind her began to shift uncomfortably, their cheers and jeers dying slowly into uncertain silence as the drone zipped back across the range and Mira still did not fire. Some said later that she was scared. Others said she was stalling, but none of them noticed that her boots had dug deeper into the gravel, her stance slightly wider now, perfectly balanced, as though she was bracing for more than just recoil. The drone twisted again this time, sweeping upward and curving into a steep loop that forced the judges to squint, and the tech monitoring the flight path to glance twice at his screen. Its altitude was fine, but the trajectory was off, like the drone was reacting to something not part of its programming, like it was dodging something they couldn't see. Mira exhaled softly, and in that moment her finger tightened and the second shot came like lightning, sudden and precise, but it didn't aim for the drone directly. Instead, it curved slightly like it had been caught in a current. A gust of air no one felt and passed behind the drone to the tree line at the far edge of the range where the bullet struck something that did not belong. The sound was dull, not the sharp crack of metal hitting wood, but more like the snap of something brittle, something unnatural. The trees shifted slightly and a few birds scattered into the sky, but no one saw what she had hit. Not clearly. The range marshal signaled to pause, but the owner shook his head eyes, narrowing he had spent a fortune on the drone and the match and did not want attention drawn to a malfunction. Mira lowered her rifle just slightly, not all the way, her face unreadable as the drone slowed its dance and hovered midair its rotors, buzzing unevenly now like they were fighting against interference. She turned her gaze toward the tree line and for a second her eyes widened, not in fear but in recognition, like something she expected had arrived just a few seconds early. A few of the spectators stepped forward, craning their necks to see what she had shot at, and one young man pointed out toward the trees where a strange ripple moved across the shadows. Not a shape, Not exactly, it was like heat distortion, but without the warmth bending the air like water over glass, and then it was gone, leaving only silence and the faint whir of the drone above. Mira said nothing, and yet her stance changed again, a small movement so subtle it might have been mistaken for breathing. But to those who had watched enough shooters on this range, it was clear she had just locked into something new, something real. The judges conferred quietly, their eyes flicking between Mira, the tree line, and the drone. Some of them wanted to call. The match others insisted it continue, but no one could deny something was wrong. The tech near the monitor looked pale and whispered to the range marshal that the drone had begun receiving signals not from their system, but from something else. Untraceable signals pulsing on frequencies the range had never used before, and when he tried to override them, the controls froze like the drone no longer belonged to them, like it was listening to something older than any code they could write. Mira lifted the rifle again, and this time, the drone reacted, visibly jerking back like it had sensed danger for. The first time, its movements becoming defensive, not evasive, it no longer flew in patterns. It darted in irregular bursts like a wounded bird, desperate to escape but unable to find direction, and then came the sound, the one no one could describe. Later, because it was not quite audible, not to the ears, but to the bones, a low resonance that vibrated under their feet and in their ribs, like a warning from the earth itself, and Mira fired again. The third shot was a blur, the recoil rippling through her arm like electricity, and the bullet flew in a sharp upward arc. Not at the drone, not even near it, but into the sky above, where nothing visible hovered, and yet the moment it struck something unseen, a flash burst through the air like a mirror, cracking without glass a brief ripple of form, a glimpse of something that shimmered and vanished, leaving behind only smoke and falling dust, and the drone dropped slightly in altitude as if whatever connection it had was just severed or wounded, or worse. Gasps spread through the crowd, and the techs scrambled at their consoles, trying to re-establish control over the drone. But it kept drifting now, sluggish and without purpose, and Mira took a single step forward, rifle lowered, eyes still on. The sky. The tree line behind her rustled again, and one of the judges cursed under his breath, drawing his sidearm, which was not protocol. Not during a match, but he had seen something move just behind the last pine where shadows clung too tightly. Despite the sun still shining above, and Mira said one word quietly, not loud enough to hear, but enough to still the wind for a breath. The drone suddenly plummeted 10 feet before its rotors caught again and steadied it just above the dirt, and then it released a sound that none of its programming allowed, a short burst, like a cry or a scream, metallic and strained, before it began to rise again, higher than its range settings would allow, climbing toward the clouds, as if fleeing the entire match. And Mira lifted the rifle one final time, without urgency, without effort, and the fourth shot came, and this time the bullet struck the drone dead center, collapsing its frame inward like paper folding into fire, and it exploded mid-air, sending fragments across the field in all directions as smoke trailed toward the ground. People ducked, scattered, the judges called for a full stop, and the range owner was shouting at someone no one heard because the explosion had revealed something hidden inside. The drone not wiring, not machinery, but a small sphere, no larger than a fist, that hovered in mid-air for 3 seconds, pulsing with blue light before it too shattered into dust. And as the dust fell silently, the wind changed again, cold and sour, and Mira turned slowly to face the tree line. Her rifle still warm in her hands, and her eyes darker now, as if something behind them had awakened. In the silence that followed, a single whistle blew, not from any official or spectator, but from the direction of the ridge, and it was not a signal of victory or surrender. It was a sound like calling something home, and Mira stiffened as if she had been waiting for that sound the whole time, and the match forgotten. The range scattered the crowd. Uneasy began, backing away, but Mira remained still, her boots rooted, her shoulders squared, her hands lowering the rifle finally as she stared into the trees, where something now stepped forward. Not loudly, not clearly, but with purpose. A figure not fully visible. Not yet a silhouette, more like a shadow that had chosen a shape temporarily, and the air around it bent slightly, like gravity had weakened, and Mira took one step forward, then stopped, her voice rising just enough for those nearest to hear. And she said something that did not sound like English. Did not sound like any language they knew. But whatever she said, it made the figure stop, its form flickering slightly, and the pressure in the air dropped like a stone before it began moving again. Faster now, and Mira raised the rifle once more, without fear and without hesitation, as if the next shot would not be at a drone or a target, but at something far older. And with that, the light dimmed ever so slightly, though the sun had not moved. And the earth seemed to hold its breath, as if remembering this moment from long ago, when the same rifle had been lifted by another hand against the same presence, returning again to broken rifle. Mira felt something shift in the air as the fragment of sphere shattered into dust, its glow fading into tiny motes floating down toward the dirt. She blinked, and for a moment wondered if she had imagined the blue light, or if it had been there only in her memory. Nevertheless, the hush that followed echoed like someone drawing breath before a scream. The judges stood frozen, some dropping hands to mouths, others staring at the tree line where the whisper of movement fluttered like wings, though no bird dared call out. The drone pieces lay scattered. Across the field, metal shards glinting in stray sunbeams, but none seemed to still harbor spark of circuitry, only broken limbs twisted and smoldering. Yet Mira sensed energy humming beneath the soil, beneath the tree roots, beneath her bones. Something. Alive and watching. She lowered the rifle, not completely, but enough to let the shock settle in the crowd, enough for the wind to carry voices of hesitation. Some shouted for help. Others murmured that the match was rigged, that she had cheated, that something supernatural had interfered. But Mira's gaze never left the tree line, where the shadows now pooled deep as ink between trunks, where the sun failed to pierce though it shone overhead. She took a single step forward, each crunch of gravel under her boot, sounding loud in ears and loud in heart. She recalled days last winter when the snow was thick and the wind had torn at her cabin roof, and in the glare of lamps she practiced shooting not at targets, but at silhouettes she carved. From paper, hoping to quell nightmares, hoping to find precision in chaos, hoping to one day face what waited beyond sight. Now that waiting was over, the tree line stirred as if breathing, and bending, winded leaves rustled. The air was still. The judge, with the earpiece, stared, his face pale. He glanced toward the woods, then back at Mira, searching for explanation. She raised her head, listening. She heard whispers, not quite human voices, melding with crack of branches. Something moved where no living thing should stand. A branch snapped far too close to one of the range lamps. Light flickered as if electricity pulsed under the ground. She tightened her grip on the rifle, feeling its weight familiar, like meeting an old friend after long years. Apart, meanwhile, the crowd froze in disbelief. The marshal barked commands that rang hollow. He ordered people back behind lines, but no one listened. The owner shouted for security, but his voice cracked. He pointed toward the woods, urging someone to call cops, but no one moved. Mira exhaled cold air. She could feel frost creeping on her skin, though sun warmed her back. The shape moved again, deeper among pines, something glimmering in that darkness, something alien to bark and leaf, something impossible to understand. But Mira felt it as surely as she felt the rifle's recoil back when she had trained with her father. She raised the rifle again, aiming not at the drone, but at that spot between the trees where light bent strangely, where shadow thickened, where nothing should be but yet was. She steadied her aim, closing both eyes, one then the other, letting sound guide her, letting heartbeat and wind and fear guide every twitch in finger. She pulled halfway and held in the silence before the storm. And in that silence she thought she heard her father's voice soft, telling her to trust not what eyes show, but what the world hides. What defines merit is not perfection but courage. Then a sound split the air like thunder cracking open sky. A branch. Cracked, then another. Then the lamp nearest the woods flickered and snapped off, plunging part of the range into darkness. The audience gasped. Some screamed, others ducked, as if expecting something to fall upon them. Mira could not see the figure, but she could sense its pulse in her bones, the recoil in her belly, like the world had tilted and threatened to spin off its axis. She squeezed the trigger. A shot rang, echoing against distant ridge, and then nothing. Then rustling. Then a low moan that came from between trees. Not quite wind, not quite beast, not quite human. And the echo of something moving fast toward the field. Mira stood rigid, waiting for the next motion, waiting for shape to reveal itself, waiting to see what she had wounded, or summoned, or both. The judges stood with mouths open, the owner frozen mid-scream. The crowd retreated toward cars and gates, but Mira did not move. She did not drop her rifle, because she understood now that the challenge in this match was never the drone. It was the veil between things seen and unseen. It was the test she had always run toward, ignoring warnings, ignoring laughter, ignoring fear. Then out from shadows stepped something tall, gaunt, its limbs too long for human, its skin pale. Like moonlight on fresh snow, its eyes glowing faint blue like the sphere fragments, like echoes of light. No one else saw, but everyone felt. The figure paused just beyond tree line, where beams of sun and shadow collided its head, tilting slightly, as if studying Mira, as if recognizing something in her. That recognition made her pulse thrash. Something primal. Something she had locked away long ago. She raised the rifle further, knuckles white on the wood. Her whisper rose, though no one could. Hear the words, they were in old tongue and whisper of things passed down in lore her father spoke of when they sat by fire under stars and listened to wind tell stories. The figure advanced a step, then another, its motion silent, though leaves gave way under feet. No crunch audible, no scent of breath, but its presence filled the air with weight, like horizon bending, like sky dipping. Too close. Mira squeezed trigger. Again. The shot thundered, sending recoil into her shoulder metals, singing through the field. Something cracked in that figure, its outline shimmering like heat haze on asphalt, and then it retreated, vanishing behind trees, in blur of movement so fast. No eye could follow. Only its shadow remained on forest floor, stretching toward Mira, before dissolving into speckles of light again. The silence afterward was louder than the shot, louder than shattered metal. Smoke curled from wreckage of drone, its wires splayed across the dirt, smoking like veins severed from body. The sphere shards, still on air, glimmered, then dimmed, then died. Light returned to lamps and sun filtered down again, mocking calm after storm. The judges shook heads. The marshal raised his hand to call match end. But Mira did not lower rifle. Her eyes scanned trees, scanning sky, scanning every fragment of light and shadow. Her body still humming with the shot, with the strange echo, with knowledge that she had faced something. Greater than marksmanship, greater than applause, greater than fear. Some among crowd dared to approach tree line, but none dared call out, something was wrong, something beyond their measure. They whispered among themselves that she had seen demon, or spirit, or alien. Some said she had lost her mind, others said she had saved them, though they did not know from what. The lamps flickered once more, not wind, but something unseen tugged at wires, something brushing against surface of things seen and unseen. Mira felt hair rise on the back of her neck, smelled ozone, though no lightning had struck. Then the wind came again, gust sharp cold slicing through the air, stirring smoke and dust. It swirled around her boots, around the wreckage, around the field, whipping her hair into eyes. She blinked through grit, and held rifle tight as something moved behind a tree trunk again. Pale outline, brief as lightning dash. Passed it a hand, the fingers long and thin, pushing bark aside, then pulling back. It vanished again, leaving scorch marks on wood. Mira swallowed hard, did not lower rifle. She exhaled slowly each breath, tasting smoke and fear and determination, and before she could raise herself higher, before crowd could flee further, before judges could intervene, the shape appeared back at the edge of field at tree line. Its silhouette clearer this time, not fully human but not fully thing of nightmare either. Its eyes still glowing, blue fragments of sphere embedding darkly on its frame as if those shards had grown roots into flesh. It stepped forward. Despite broken form, it moved with purpose, with intention. Mira felt quake in world when it crossed threshold of light into shadow and light again. Her heart thundered. She knew this match had ended. Yet the trial just begun. She whispered the name of someone long dead. Someone whose rifle, this was someone whose sight this rifle bore when Mira shot that final time. She aimed not to kill, not to test, but to warn, to challenge, to draw. The line between what is seen and what is sacred, between laughter and legacy, and the moment she fired, the air trembled as if reality itself had answered, and she saw in that figure recognition. She saw love and betrayal and impossibility and hope, silence. Engulfed field like deep night brooding after storm, Mira stood with rifle lowered finally, though not relaxed. She watched the figure hover at boundary of trees, then vanish altogether as dawn light strained through canopy, leaving only emptiness, where terror and awe had stood. Spectators gaped, sunlight streamed over wreckage. The drone pieces, the scorched earth, the cough of smoke, rising from broken wood and scorched grass. Mira dropped rifle butt to ground heel on dirt, pushing it slightly. It sank into soil moist from last night dew. A tremor ran through field as if the earth itself had exhaled. She looked down, then up, then toward woods expecting something. More. Something she had awakened. Something they laughed at, but which ignored. Laughter. Something she had drawn into the open, and which might now be free or waiting, or both. Her eyes glistened with possibility, dread, hope, and unspeakable things. She carried weight now heavier than any rifle, heavier than mocking voices, because now she knew something else saw her too, and that gaze would never leave her. The silence that followed Mira's final shot spread across the broken rifle range like smoke, slow and suffocating. No one spoke, no one moved. The drone was gone, vaporized. In mid-air with nothing left but embers and fragments and that strange metallic taste that still lingered on the wind. Mira stood at the center of it, all the rifle hanging loosely from her shoulder. Her eyes locked on the trees as if she could still see the thing that had stepped forward and stared back at her not with rage or malice, but with something far worse, recognition. The judges whispered among themselves, but their voices were brittle, uncertain, and the marshal kept checking his earpiece, which now only hissed with static, while the owner of the range paced in circles, muttering things no one could understand, all while the spectators who had not already fled stood rooted to the ground, unsure whether they had witnessed a miracle, or a mistake, or perhaps the start of something that could not be undone. Mira knew deep down that it had not ended. Whatever that thing was, whatever had moved through the trees, it had not come to test her accuracy or challenge her skill. It had come to be seen, and now that it had been seen, it would not simply vanish into the shadows again. The cold settled deeper, then not just in the wind, but in the earth itself, a kind of creeping chill that soaked into the soles of boots and made every breath feel like it carried snow even though the sun still hung in the sky. Mira looked down at the rifle, and for a moment she imagined it glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm with her heart. But she said nothing. She just turned slowly to face the Others, and as she did, the ground beneath her gave a soft tremor, not enough to cause panic, but just enough to remind everyone that things were shifting not just in the air or the range, but in the fabric of what they understood to be real. The crowd began to murmur. Finally, someone shouted to end the match. Someone else screamed that Mira was cursed or blessed or haunted. The words no longer mattered because they were all trying to make sense of what they could not explain. Mira raised a hand, not in defense, not in warning, but in silence. And the strange part was, they listened. The wind dropped for just a second, and her voice broke through, small and steady and strange, when she said one sentence that made the owner of the range stumble back, and one of the judges cross himself without knowing why she said it was never the drone I was aiming at. The stillness that followed those words was heavier than before, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm or a funeral or something. Worse, because it carried understanding not full, but partial, and sometimes partial understanding is more dangerous than none. Mira turned again this time toward the ridge at the far end of the property where the trees grew closer together, and the undergrowth choked the trail where no one was supposed to be, and yet that second whistle had come from there shrill and out of place and unmistakably real. No one admitted to blowing it. No one even claimed to be near that side of the field. But it had echoed clearly just after the drone was destroyed, and Mira had felt it not just as a sound but as a pull. She started walking toward the ridge, slowly, steadily dragging her boots through gravel and ash, the rifle balanced in her hands, not ready to fire, but not quite at rest either. Behind her, voices rose and fell. Arguments sparked fear, caught fire. Someone tried to stop her but could not bring themselves to move. No one wanted to be the one to stand between her and wherever she was. Going the trees ahead seemed darker than before, despite the light filtering through the branches, as if they had thickened since morning, or as if something inside them was pressing outward. Trying to escape, as Mira stepped past the last boundary, marker something cracked behind her like glass or bone or both, and she knew without turning that the figure had returned. Maybe not the same one, maybe not even one at all, but something that wore the shape of what she had wounded, something that, now watched with clearer eyes unclouded by interference. Mira paused just beyond the tree line, just where light gave way to shadow, and she waited. She did not speak. She did not breathe too loudly. She just stood and let the silence grow heavy again, and then something stepped out from the brush. It was not the same figure as before. It was smaller, or maybe crouching, or maybe hunched from damage, or maybe it was never one being at all. But Mira stared at it, and it stared back, and there was recognition again, the kind that goes deeper than memory, deeper than story. The kind that exists in the blood and bone, the kind that no one can teach or explain, and Mira knew then that this thing was old, not ancient like ruins or bones, but old. Like language old, like instinct. Old like the first fire ever lit in the first cave ever carved. The thing shifted, its form rippled like smoke, but never broke eye contact. Its body barely touched the ground, and where it moved, the grass died, and the roots curled upward as if trying to escape the contact. Mira took one more step forward, just one, and the air around her changed again, sharper, tighter, thinner, like breathing through cloth. She did not raise the rifle yet, but her arms tensed, ready. Not to defend, but to signal, not to fight, but to communicate. She knew this was not a battle, not yet, but something else. An invitation, maybe, or a warning. Then the trees behind the creature stirred, not with wind, but with presence, more of them moving in the distance, shapes barely distinguishable from the shadows, eyes opening where bark should be limbs stretching too far, and folding in on themselves. And Mira felt the weight of their attention, not just on her, but on the field, on the spectators, on the entire broken range, as if this place had become a stage, and now the audience had arrived unseen but watching. She remembered what her father used. To say about the old world the one before stories became lies, he had told her about the thinning of the veil, about places where the skin between things is weaker, where truth leaks through like water through cracked stone. He had warned her that some people are born close to the thin spots and they carry that crack with them wherever they go, drawing attention, drawing eyes, drawing fate. And Mira had not believed him, not fully until now. One of the figures in the woods raised something. Not a hand, not a weapon, but a kind of beacon, a pulsing shard of light that mirrored the color of the drone core that had exploded, and Mira felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but from understanding. They had not come because of her shot. They had not come because of the match. They had come because the shot had awakened something that had been buried or locked or sleeping, and now it was listening again, watching again, walking again. Behind her, the screams began not loud, not panicked, but scattered, isolated from the field, where others saw figures rising near the edge of the property, tall and thin and flickering in and out of view like candlelight. Mira turned slightly, her body shielding the rifle, and for the first time she looked scared, not because of what she saw, but because of what she felt, because she realized that the shot had not been hers entirely, that the rifle had not moved by her will alone, that something else had nudged her hand, tilted her aim, slowed her breath, dropped to one knee, not in surrender, but in defense, and she leveled the rifle, not at the figure, not at the crowd, but at the space between them, at the tear in the world that now shimmered with light and sound and silence. And she shouted a name, not her own, not her father's, but one she had never spoken before, one that tasted like ash and thunder and snow, and the trees answered back not with words but with motion, bending forward, as if bowing, as if bracing for what came next. And what came next did not come from the trees or the sky, but from below, a vibration in the earth. A heartbeat older than any memory, a sound that shattered the air without making a noise, a pressure that dropped birds from the sky and bent light around Mira's shoulders, and the rifle grew hot in her hands, and the figure ahead stepped back, not in fear but in readiness, because something was coming, and Mira was the door. She said, "It was never the drone I was aiming at," and the silence that followed stretched, like the sky before a storm. Her voice carrying through the broken range, like a ripple across water touching every soul that remained within earshot, freezing them not with cold, but with the realization that none of this was about a contest or a shot or a score. It was about something older, something deeper, something that had waited long enough. The whistle blew again, sharp and distant, but no one could find the source. It echoed off the hills and through the trees and curled down the ridge. Like a ghost riding wind, Mira turned slowly back toward the center of the field. Rifle lowered but not released, as if something in her arms still pulsed with memory, still recognized the moment as unfinished. Behind her the trees groaned, not from wind but from pressure. Something unseen passing through them, causing trunks to bend just slightly and branches to bow toward the ground like reverence or fear, or both. From the edge of the sky, clouds began to stretch inward, not thick, not dark, but thin and high like veils being drawn across the heavens. The sun dulled and the shadows shifted. Not longer, not darker, just wrong angles where none should be. Light bending in ways the eye could not follow. Mira looked up and felt it in her gut. A pull like gravity had tilted not downward, but inward, as if the world was collapsing, not from above or below, but from the center, from this exact spot. The crowd was no longer watching her. They were watching the air itself, watching how it twisted. Near the tree line where the creature had vanished, and where it now returned slower this time, deliberate and less like a shadow, more like something made of thought and smoke and weight, its steps making no sound but leaving imprints that glowed. for just a breath before vanishing. Mira raised the rifle again, her finger resting gently on the trigger, not with intent to fire, but with the promise that she could. And then, the second shot came. But it did not come from her. It came from the ridge, from somewhere unseen. A crack sharp and sudden and distant, but too loud to be natural, too heavy to be a hunter or a gunner or a farmer's rifle. It was something else. Something older that knew how to speak through fire, and Mira staggered backward, the sound ringing in her bones as the creature stopped mid-step and turned its head slowly, as if hearing something it did not expect. The air shimmered again, and the grass at Mira's feet bent outward, as though from a blast that never came, and the ground trembled not hard, not violently, just enough to be noticed, just enough to remind them all that something had stirred that should not have, and now it could not return to sleep. The shape ahead of her began to split, flickering like heat, then stretching wider and wider until it became not one form, but several, each moving like limbs from a central idea, each connected by the same shimmer of light and dust and memory. She took one step forward and then another, each footfall sinking, with the beat beneath her skin, not her heart, not her breath, but something older, something that had been passed down through her blood from the man who trained her, and the man before him, and the stories he refused to write down, because they were not meant to be read. They were meant to be remembered. Mira held the rifle up not to threaten, but to witness, and the moment she did, the sky cracked open, but there was no thunder. Only silence, thick and ringing, and absolute. The clouds pulled away, like curtains revealing not light, but space deep and endless and watching, and something began to descend. Not fast, not loud, just slow and inevitable, and quiet enough to make people drop to their knees. Mira remained standing even as the light touched the ground, and formed a circle around her, around the creature, around the broken remains of the drone, as if drawing lines on a map that no one else could read. And in that light something spoke, not in words, not in sound, but in understanding. It filled the space between every heartbeat and poured into the minds of those still conscious. And what it said was not a command or a threat, but a question, one that Mira did not know she could answer. But the rifle in her hands began to glow, and in the glow, she saw her father not as he was before he died, but as he had looked on the day he gave her the rifle, tired but proud, quiet but knowing, and his hand touched hers not in comfort, but in readiness. Mira lifted the rifle one last time, and the creature stepped closer, its many forms folding into one again. Taller, now clearer now, with eyes that burned like blue fire. Not in rage, but in need, and Mira aimed not at it, but past it into the heart of the light. And for 1 second, everything paused. Not just time, but space breath motion thought. And in that second, she pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the ridge and the trees and the sky and the minds of every being that still stood in the range. It tore not through matter, but through meaning, and when it struck the center of the circle, the light did not shatter. It expanded, washing over everything with a warmth that was not heat and a brightness that carried no pain, and then it was gone. Mira fell to one knee, not from exhaustion, but released the rifle cooling in her hands, the ground beneath her, no longer trembling, just still behind her. The spectators stood slowly, eyes wide, mouths open, some crying, some laughing, some unable to speak at all, and the judges dropped their notepads. And the marshal took off his badge and threw it into the dust. And the owner of the range fell to his knees and whispered something to himself that only he could hear. The sky cleared, the clouds retreated, and the shadows returned to their rightful places, and the creature stepped back, its body fading slowly into the wind, not in defeat, but in agreement. And as it vanished, Mira heard that second whistle again, softer this time, almost kind. and the rifle in her hands cracked gently along its barrel and released a single spark that rose into the air and vanished like a firefly finding home. And just like that, the match was over. But Broken Rifle would never be the same. Because sometimes a target is not made of metal. Sometimes it is made of truth, and truth once hit never stops echoing.